All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
The battery is a little low on the microphone, so when it goes out, it goes out. I'm not going to deal with it. But hope everyone had a good night's sleep. You should have had an extra hour, as Lum said this morning. Longest day of the year, we have 25 hours. Not quite. But bad math, that's what that is. My 25, that's what he said, not me. That's what he said. Oh, sorry, that's bad. I shouldn't repeat false information. Oh my. We're going to begin on page 83 here in a moment. I don't really have any announcements other than there's an extracurricular thing I've been wanting to do for a while, and finally I got it set up. In the hallway, there's a television monitor that has a couple of either book recommendations or some thought-provoking advice. Check it out. If it applies to you, good. If it doesn't, pay no mind to it. I'm going to try to make it change every other week or so. So it'll be something different for you to kind of add to what you need. And I know we have a lot of variety of needs in the congregation, so I'm going to try to really make a huge variety as best I can, both books that I've read, passages to look into, and I'll even tell you what I'm studying at the moment so you have an idea of where I'm at the moment. So check that out. There's about 8 different slides. There's not going to be more, or you'll stand there forever. But if you have suggestions, let me know. I'll make something up and make it look nice, and you can check it out in the hallways. So check that out in between services. Other than that, did Jean get to come home yesterday?
Jean came home yesterday. She's safe and sound. She's non-weight bearing for 3 to 4 weeks.
So she weighs nothing. Oh, really?
She thinks by appearance, she thinks by using her heel, not her foot, that it's okay.
Did you offer to pick her up?
She didn't go.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind.
No, she didn't. She didn't call.
Oh, my. Well,
she's happy to be home, and her cat is so happy that she's home.
I say so. Cat has company now.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's livestock. That's the appropriate term. My. Is Philip doing okay? Oh, yeah, he's traveling. He's going hunting. Oh, you're single for a while. Never mind. Okay. Be praying for Philip's travel. He's going with his brothers, isn't he?
He's going with our older son and his son.
What am I thinking of?
Son and grandson.
Okay. Well, never mind then. Pray for safety on their travels. Maybe Philip might shoot something. I think he'll get more advice than he will do shooting. But we'll see. Well, okay. Well, with that thought, does anybody have anybody that we do need to add to our prayer list or have an update on? Okay, we will ask Jacob if he would lead us in an opening prayer, and then we'll begin.
Most gracious, loving Father in heaven, we thank you once again for this day, beautiful day you give us to gather once again to study your word. Father, we pray that you be with us in this morning lesson, that we'll learn the examples that are put forth and use that in our lives to help us grow as Christians. Father, also just pray and ask us to help us as always look for ways we can serve you better. We just thank you so much for your son, and it's in his name we pray.
Amen. So, if you want to open your Bible to go along with the lesson text, we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 6 this morning, and we are going to read the full chapter. It doesn't quite give us the full chapter in the book, but it's only about 3 or 4 extra verses. But this morning we're going to talk about a relationship that David had in the beginning of his relationship with Saul, and then also after Saul had passed away, this relationship would come back again. And this is David and English people would say Michael, or Michelle, or McCall, or however you want to say her name, a lady. This was his first wife. David had to go through Philistines in order to win her hand in marriage, even though he was promised he would receive the daughter of Saul by defeating Goliath, but then Saul added extra terms. We're going to see the development of this relationship, and there's going to be a gap in this relationship. We'll find out in the middle of this lesson. But the introduction will give us some background information, and then it'll lead us into what's happened from the death of Saul all the way up to 2 Samuel chapter 6. So let's read the introduction. I'll make some comments, and then we'll go from there.
Michal was the daughter of King Saul. Although she loved David, her father attempted to use her feelings to his advantage. He said, "I will give her to him, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Consequently, Saul set the price to marry Michal at 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. He did not do this because he believed David would succeed, for Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Instead, Saul's plan failed. David and his men killed 200 of Israel's enemies, twice the number Saul requested, and they gave it in full account to the king that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Thus Saul knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. When Michal realized Saul intended to kill David, she warned her husband to escape from Saul's wrath and helped him to do so. Rather than fleeing with David, however, Michal remained in Saul's house. Eventually, she was given by Saul to another man. After Saul's death, David called upon Ishbosheth, Saul's son, to return Michal to him. Ishbosheth complied, and the two were reunited. According to Smith, David clearly thought he was entitled to take back his wife because he had never given her a divorce. Taking Michal back is not condemned in the record. Nevertheless, the relationship was not the same. Michal was David's first wife, but she was no longer his only wife. Bitterness and resentment replaced love and admiration. Michal's changed attitude toward David is on display in our lesson text. Upon witnessing David leap with joy over the arrival of the ark of the Lord in Jerusalem, she despised him in her heart. Concerning this reaction, Smith continued, "Why Michal found David's actions so disgusting is not stated. Perhaps for the first time she was observing the death of David's devotion to the Lord. Then again, perhaps her idea was that the king should avoid mixing with the people and be aloof and inaccessible. In any case, the basic problem was that Michal did not share her husband's enthusiasm for the ark. Michal and David were clearly not on the same page. He was determined to celebrate in honor of the Lord. She was determined to maintain royal appearances."
Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind. While David is running away from Saul, this is kind of in the middle of his reign. And whenever David is established in Hebron, it would say that he reigned there for 7.5 years. And then after Saul's death, and the issues that happened with Ishbosheth being murdered by his sons, and then David dealing with that situation, then he reigns over Jerusalem for about 32.5 years, so a total of 40 years. But with that said, that whole 7.5 years at Hebron, he did not have Michal or Michal. Even before that time, she had already been given away by Saul to another man. And what's interesting is when David makes the deal with, I think Abner is his name. Let me make sure that's his name. With Abner. He makes a deal with Abner and says, "If you give me back Michal, then we'll be good." And he does that. Well, she had already married another guy, and this guy was in love with her. And in fact, it would say whenever he went to go get Michal, that he followed her up to a certain point and he wept bitterly along the way, kind of showing the pains of what multiple marriages can do. In fact, if you get involved with a marriage that you're not supposed to be a part of and you're actually supposed to be over here, there's some emotional ties connected with that. But another thing to keep in mind, other than it could be anywhere from 8 to 15 years that David and Michal have been separated. Think about how much you don't change in 8 to 15 years. You do change a lot. David also had 6 other wives. You look in 2 Samuel chapter 3, 2 through 5, it's going to give a list of the different wives, 6 of them at least, not including Michal. She was the first. But 6 of his wives who gave children. Later in the text, it's going to say that he married more concubines and more wives. Now, again, and we talked about this last week a little bit, the Bible in the Old Testament doesn't condemn polygamy. God simply allows it, but then he clarifies and he verifies it in the New Testament law by saying one man, one wife, unless something were to happen. I think it's because of this example that David gives to his kids that explains why Solomon had such a big issue with women in his life. Well, Dad did it. I should do it too. Not a very wise move, wise man. And you see what happens with Solomon. So know that David took a lot of wives, and this is going to cause some problems. So on top of the tensions of not being together for a long time, and finally coming together because David's making a political deal, he finally gets back his legitimate first wife, and with all these other women, ladies, how would you feel? Well, she's going to have some disgust towards this as well. And then also on top of how she views David's interaction with the ark. The first two sections are going to deal with the process of moving the ark. And then the last section will deal with her response to David as the Ark of the Covenant is coming into Jerusalem. So let's go ahead and read the text, and then I'll open it up to comments after the first section. But we're actually going to read verses 1 through 8. So 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. Again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up the ark of God, whose name is called by the name the Lord of Hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart. They brought it out into the house of Abinadab, which was on top of a hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. Then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord on all kinds of instruments of fir wood, on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on sistrums, and on cymbals. And when they came to Nachon's threshold, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day.
With David firmly established as king in Jerusalem, selected as the city on which he would reign, plans were made for the ark of the Lord to that location. Paul would explain, it was unthinkable that the ark should remain in obscurity in the private house in the border of the land. One Jerusalem had become the city of David, the king purpose that Jerusalem should be the city where the Lord was honored and worshipped. By enshrining the ark, the symbol of God's presence, there David transformed the old Jebusite stronghold into a place where one God was pleased to make himself known, the center of the earth, the side of his throne, and the connecting link between heaven and earth. David's intention was good, but problems arose and came down. Rather than transporting the ark in a manner prescribed in the law, they set the ark of God on the cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. Whether their intentions were pure or not, their actions were misguided. Despite the initial stage of the ark's journey being an occasion of celebration, the mood changed suddenly. Describing what caused this change and taking towards it. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and pulled it, the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was raised against Uzzah, and God struck him for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. God had specified both how the ark should be transported and who should transport it, because his instructions were ignored at the tragedy result. In response to Uzzah's untimely death, David became angry because the Lord was not breaking against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah. Shortly thereafter, this now turned bitter, for David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" We always summarize the king's
Okay, I want to bring to mind a couple of things. First off, in moving the ark, I want you to see how important this was to David. From the beginning of the text, look at how much prep work he puts into this one thing. The choice men of Israel, 30,000. He had to go call every single soldier, every single captain. He had to get specific men, elected men by their captain, proven men. So it took time to train these men. All these men, David said, I want you to come with me. He went and went to the Ark of the Covenant, which would have been about 10, 12 miles away from Jerusalem. But they went and they set the ark, verse 3, on a new cart. They built a new cart. They traveled, they gathered men, they built a new cart. Even the people who had been protecting the Ark of the Covenant, second half of verse 3, the sons of the father who was in charge of taking care of the Ark of the Covenant. We would love to go see the Ark being placed in the city of God. Can we do that? In fact, can we drive this? Yes, you can drive it. You protected it this long. You can see it go all the way to God's city. So the army, the distance, the new cart, the former protectors now leading it to its new place. Instruments, if you look in 1 Chronicles 15, actually 1 Chronicle 13, that's where you'll see, I like that chapter because it mentions Ethan the musician, and this Ethan's also a musician. I was like, yeah. He's also mentioned as a wise man, the second wisest man. I'm not sure I match up to that. But all these instruments, these people took time to practice their craft, and these would have been a special occupation in the Levites' ministry. Musicians would have been a part of that. All kinds of different musicians walking along, playing music. So all this preparation and this pomp and this circumstance. And they come and they find the ark after an 8-mile trek, and they pick it up and they put it on this cart. And then something bad happens, verse 7. Now, my first thought, modern day thinking, is, God, how dare you? Do you know how much time and preparation we put into this? Our hearts were into it. We invested heavily into this. We got you brand new everything, state-of-the-art things, and then you still rejected us. At first, David seems justified. But the king of the law, according to Deuteronomy 17, was supposed to know the law to protect his people. And when you look at Numbers chapter 3, I don't know why it gives Exodus 25 as the text. Exodus 25, 12 through 14, all that says is when Bezalel was building the ark, it was to have 4 different rings, so you could put poles in it, and it was supposed to be laid with gold, and these poles had to be a certain kind of wood, and they had to be overlaid with gold. That's all it says. When you look at Numbers 3, it would say that the Kohathites, which would have been one of the 3, you got Gershom, Merari, and Kohath. The Kohathites, they would have been the ones in charge of just moving the vessels of the tabernacle or the Ark of the Covenant. And when you look at what was given to them in chapter 7, Merari and Gershom were given carts to carry their stuff in. The Kohathites, they had to carry everything by hand, no carts. So there's already a violation. 1, it has to be a Kohathite priest, and it has to be people ordained. 2, it has to be carried by hand, not by a cart. And then you see also in chapter 4, in the latter half, it would say if anybody were to touch the Ark of the Covenant, and it was not covered with the proper garment, or anybody were to look on it at the wrong time, they would die, and God's anger would be kindled against them. What we find here is not God kind of like, where I guess some people might be like, well, God cut them some slack. They just didn't know. No, they should have known. They claimed to be God's people. And guess what? They paid the price because they didn't actually know the law. Now, that's a problem. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But good intentions to God are nothing without God's instructions. You look at Romans chapter 10, 1 through 2. My heart's desire is that Israel might be saved. But they have a zeal for God, not according to knowledge, but they go to establish their own righteousness. We have a lot of people who are very sincere individuals, and they're very devoted to God, but not in God's instructive ways. It doesn't matter how it makes you feel. And it doesn't matter how it makes you jump out of the pew and go, "Oh, hallelujah, praise the Lord." If it's not according to this, God says that's worthless. In fact, when you look at what it did in the Old Testament, this prompted God, because of something so holy, it prompted God to kill a man because he had violated the law. Now think about this in spiritual terms. When you violate God's law today, are you still in good standing with God? Let's work backwards. Were you ever in good standing with God if you worshiped Him incorrectly? If you think about Him, when I say think about Him, you have ungodly expectations to how God should act in certain circumstances because of your lack of study. Does God allow that kind of ignorance? Absolutely not. That's why it's very critical that we know the book, or at least attempt to learn it throughout life, so that we don't find this kind of pitfall. Well, God, I was just simply trying to protect it. I know that. But you violated the law. And when you look at the law by itself, there is no mercy under the law. Law is law. You touch it, you die. That's simply it. This is one of those prime examples that we need to take people to help understand, see the criticalness of making sure what you're doing is right. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting, when you look at when Saul reigned, chapter 13, I want to say is when he started reigning. Do you recall what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 5? That kind of wiped out Eli from being the judge and priest over Israel? I'll give you a pretty on-spot hint. They stole the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, Eli, his sons, they had been slain, but he didn't fall off his seat because he heard his sons had been slain. He fell off his seat because he heard the ark of God had been taken. And he fell down, he broke his neck, and he died. Now, the Philistines kept the ark for a certain period of time, which is where you find this weird story in chapter 5 about the ark of God resting before Dagon, and it's just sitting there. And Dagon falls flat on its face. It loses its arms, its head becomes decapitated, and the Philistines say, "We don't want this thing." In fact, God curses them with a plague, and the Philistines said, "We want this out." And in fact, it stayed at Kirjath-jearim for about 20 years. Now, there's a problem with that. How long did Saul reign? It's the same amount as how long David reigned? And Solomon reigned. Yeah, 40 years. He reigned 40 years. At what time during when Saul became king did he end up going to get the Ark of the Covenant? Now that's a little bit harder, and I can't give you an exact date, but what I can give you are a couple of numbers. When you look at 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 18, it would say that Saul was going into battle, and he told the priest, "We need to go to Kirjath-jearim, and we need to get the Ark of God, and we need to bring it here." The only problem is the Israelites, before Saul was initiated king, they were using the Ark of the Covenant as if it was kind of like, well, I'm wearing my rosemary beads, therefore God is with me because I'm wearing this necklace. God's not in the necklace. God is with His people, abiding with them in their soul due to knowledge and them acting obediently. It's not in an object. The Israelites were turning the Ark of the Covenant as if, well, we have a one-up on you because we have the Ark of the Covenant. Not we have God, who is the God of the Ark of the Covenant, who dwells on the mercy seat between the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant. They looked at the Ark of the Covenant. And that's kind of what we see in chapter 14 of 1 Samuel. Now, that's the last time we hear about the ark until this. So now this is more than 20 years. So at some point, the Ark of the Covenant had traveled from Kirjath-jearim, and it came to this place, Gibeah, which is where they found Ahio and Uzzah protecting the Ark of the Covenant in their home. pretty much all I'm trying to get to is when you look at the timestamps that are given for the Ark of the Covenant, they don't make sense unless if you look into certain key text. So if someone says, well, you can't believe in the Bible because it can't even get time frames right, it doesn't give us every single time frame, but we need to know the Ark of the Covenant went different places between the reign of Saul and then when David's trying to bring it into Jerusalem. And once it's in Jerusalem, it doesn't leave until the Babylonian ransack in 606 and 586 BC. So just be aware of that. There are some issues some people bring up with that, but that's just a minor thing. So something else we need to realize as well, between the next section and what we just read, 1 Chronicles 14 gives another story after David finds out, I can't move the Ark of the Covenant. What do I do? Well, I have all these men. I have all these priests. What do we do? Well, they all go home. And in fact, they fight a battle with the Philistines. That's 1 Chronicles 14. This story, at least the rest of the text in chapter 6, is going to pick up with 1 Chronicles 15, where David returns after the Ark of the Covenant had been stored at the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, and he's going to go back and get it. So this next phrase that we see, or this next section of the text, a period of time has already transpired. Just be aware of that. A battle has already been fought. David's back in Jerusalem. Now his focus is back on moving the Ark of the Covenant. Now, any thoughts before we go to the next section? All right. Okay. Verses 12 through 18. Now it was told King David that the Lord had blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went, and he brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. So it was, when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Then David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Then he distributed among the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, both the women and the men, to everyone a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, and a cake of raisins. So all the people departed and returned to his house.
When Uzzah died, the efforts to move the ark to Jerusalem stalled. Rather than continuing the process, David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark remained in the location for 3 months. During which time the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. As Davis noted, God soon made it plain that his severe deed was not his last word about the ark. True, when Uzzah grabbed the ark, he was cut down, but the ark was not automatically deadly. Consequently, David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. David's disposition changed from anger to gladness because he devoted his attention to transporting the ark in the manner prescribed by God. Before his second attempt to bring the ark to Jerusalem occurred, David addressed the Levites and said, "You are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Sanctify yourselves. You are the brethren, that you may bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel to the place I have prepared for it. For because you did not do it the first time, the Lord of our God broke out against us, because he did not consult him with proper order. Consequently, the Levites carried the ark in a manner prescribed by law as they proceeded to Jerusalem. Sacrifices were continually offered." Sumari wrote, David probably did not slaughter the animals himself, but he emphasizes that he was the central character in bringing the ark to Jerusalem. The purpose of sacrificing all along the way to Jerusalem is to appease the Lord's anger and please his God. In conjunction with the procession, David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. David's clothing, a linen ephod, is unique. Rather than wearing the robes of a king, he wore a garb of a priest. Chisholm suggested apparently David is functioning as a royal priest of sorts. According to a parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 15, the Levitical priests who are carrying the ark also wore linen robes for the occasion. David's exercising of the legitimate royal priestly function in conjunction with the Levites contrasts with Saul, who disobeyed Samuel's order and overstepped his boundaries by usurping Samuel's rule. Regardless, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw that King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart.
Okay, so the second time around, and I think the 3 months was necessary so David could go back, he could start evaluating where did we go wrong, what happened, and I'm pretty sure he found his answer in the law of the Lord. So once he figures out, we have to do this, in the words that he used in verse 13 of 1 Chronicles 15, we did not consult him about the proper order. Now notice he doesn't say we did not pray to him and ask him what we ought to do. We did not consult his word to find the proper order. I think that's what David is making mention of. Now it's interesting as well. The law doesn't say anything about when the ark of the Lord is traveling that you have to give a sacrifice every couple of steps. I can only imagine the fear in the eyes of those cattle who happened to be traveling along with them, and they had quite a few miles to go. That's a lot of beef and a lot of sheep. So I don't know why exactly he might have felt compelled to do that from a law standpoint. Also him dancing with all his might. The king was probably sweating a lot. If you see any kind of gymnastics or any kind of dance competitions and they have a long routine, yeah, you're not going to stay dry. I can only imagine what David was doing, and I don't think he was breakdancing before the Lord. But that's kind of an odd way of an expression towards God. And the first thing that popped up into my mind is I think it's Mercy Me song, I Can Only Imagine. And one of the verses in there is, will I dance for you, Jesus, or in awe of you be still? From his song perspective, he's asking theoretical questions. Well, what am I going to do when I'm in heaven? Will I want to dance? Will I be like David? Will I just be standing in awe of you and your greatness and your superiority? And some people kind of throw that down like, well, that's denominationalism. Well, from the Old Testament, that's a view of homage and devotion to God. So I see why he used that phrase. But it's just kind of off kilter a little bit because we don't see that kind of expression today. And I've heard someone say, we're devoting this football game to God. God is with us and will win. I think that's a bad use of saying God's with you. Or God will be with us in this battle and we will overcome. We see that a couple of times. I've never heard someone say, if we dance hard enough, God will be with us through this dance. But with David's case, God does approve this. And he even wears the priest's garb. I don't necessarily agree with the commentator's comment that he's functioning as a royal priest. I think what he's trying to do, and this goes along with why he gave sacrifice so many steps, it was simply his way of this was big for him. It meant everything to him. If I have to give more than what's necessary to show my appreciation to God and him not to be angry that we're moving this and I don't want to anger God, I want to make sure this is in his place with his city near his temple. And he wanted to build a temple, though God told David, not you, your son. I think we just simply see this great display of one's reverence in the Old Testament towards God. Now, I have nothing against that. You have a comment? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, in a penitent way, and this is a little bit different than Uriah. Uriah and Bathsheba and David was, even though he willingly ignored the law, it killed someone due to sin. Now, in the sense of Uriah, someone did die because there was a violation of the law. But I can only imagine how frequent this was in David's mind, of the guilt that he felt. And I don't even know what Ahio may have been thinking. My brother is sitting right next to me. Why is he dead? I don't know how he worked through that, but it was probably a very emotional ordeal. And probably after that, I don't know if Ohio wanted anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant after what happened, because he would have been afraid for his life. Well, he'd been protecting it. What about me? I don't know. But I think in the sense of his sorrow for what happened last time, that probably is a good call as to why he did that. And then the royal priest garb. Let me get to that. I forgot. When you look at Exodus 28, I believe it's about verse 4 or 14 and following, it talks about how the ephod was to be designed. It was woven with this blue, purple, badger skin and a little bit of linen, all weaved together into this little plate. And all the priests would wear it. It would have two kind of onyx stones on it. And would have some gold engravings, and would have the name of Israel's tribes on those. And every time the priests were to put on the ephod, it were to represent that I'm carrying the people, so to speak. And what I do, I'm serving the people and I'm serving God. I think David in this case as well, when you look at Numbers chapter 7, and it talks about how the ark was to be covered, I think this wasn't necessarily David trying to be a priest. I think he was trying to respect the law, and we start to see his interpretation just a little bit. It says nothing about the king wearing this, but I think it's his respect towards, I just don't want to violate the law this time. We've got to do it by the book. So, I don't know. We can take it what it is. I also think it's interesting to see how grateful he is towards this, and we'll talk about Michael here in a moment. Verse 17, brought the ark of the Lord, set it in the midst of the tabernacle that David had built, so the tent. They offer peace offerings and burnt offerings before the Lord. So this is after it's in the city. He blessed God in the presence of the people, and then as a way of appreciating his thankfulness, he gives back to the people, giving them food. This is a joyous day. Be filled, celebrate, and then the people go back home. From Michael's perspective, and this is where the rest of the text is going to go, from Michael's perspective, she didn't like this. Verse 16, and I really don't want to make a whole lot of comments on that part yet. I want us to go to Michael rebukes David, and then we'll come back to this text, because I think they need to be connected rather than discussing them separately. So does anybody have any comments not related to Michael yet, but about the other things?
I guess if you've heard one sermon, you've heard 100 sermons about us, that good intentions aren't always the correct way to do things, or even worship. God, like denominations, most denomination people have good intentions, but are they following God's word? And there's been a lot of sermons, I guess, preached on that idea there.
I think so, and I think looking at the spiritual aftermath from David's perspective, because Uzzah didn't get to see the aftermath, other than he woke up in eternity. I think people have that same response. They get angry, but then if someone tries to show them the truth, they say, well, you just think you're better than me, and then they start becoming resentful about it. Notice it took David 3 months to figure out what's going on. I think sometimes an immediate response may not be the best thing, but it does show us that maybe a little bit of time can help people think. I think that's a good lesson you can pull from that. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, I read something yesterday, somebody said about the rapture and the Antichrist. They've been taught that all their lives. I was brought up being taught this, and they can't get away from it. You know what I'm saying? It's good intentions, but it's wrong.
And trying to work with them to get out of that, I think, is it's a journey for them to work themselves out of that. That's a discussion for another time, but sadly that is the case. But man, any other comments? Okay, last section, verse 20 through 23. I'll kind of paraphrase some of the things that are in the book, but we'll read the text and then we'll go back through and talk about some things. Verse 20, David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious it was for the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." So David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord over Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord. And I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight. And as for the maidservant of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor." Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. Now, just a couple of things to note from the book. The commentator is going to say that David is called out by Michal, and her assessment of the situation is you're just like a drunk fellow dancing before all these other people. There's something very important about that. But then afterwards, David defends it by saying, and I think he kind of uses the same kind of language that Paul would say to the Corinthians, "We preach the foolishness of God rather than the wisdom of men." And David's defending himself by saying, look, I'll be even more undignified than this. If you deem what I did for God not right, I'll be even more undignified, and I'll be humbled in my own opinion because I know what I was doing and for the reason I was doing it. And it might seem like he's being a little assertive here, but we'll talk about that in a second. Michal rejects this. In fact, what happens as a consequence to this, she just doesn't have children. I think that's because the relationship between her and David just never really picked up into anything after this. Couple of things I do want to point out about this. This would not be the first situation where I've seen a man give devotion to God, and or it could be opposite. It could be a woman giving devotion to God, and the spouse just simply doesn't understand. And they question and they say, "Why are you doing this? This is pointless. Why are you wasting your time? You could be doing something so much better in this." And I think from Michal's perspective, a king should be up here. And it's all about appearance and having that, my people type appearance. I don't think Michal liked seeing what David was doing. But then I also think on another part, though David is not called wrong in this encounter, I think it would be wrong if someone were to build a relationship with another individual and religion was never discussed to begin with. If you recall, and Brenda, I think you're the one who brought it up, whenever David was married to Michal and he ran out of the house, it would say that she took one of the household idols and hid it in the bed. Well, in the Hebrew, that's like a false idol or a statue of sorts. Why would it have been there? Well, it could be the case that Saul had some affiliation, because it wouldn't be uncommon. He didn't know God's law, didn't know his ways, and he messed up multiple times. It could be the case that she would have taken some of the things she was raised with, took it with her and paid homage to this idol, but also the God of Israel. Loved David, but simply loved him as a person. Didn't necessarily agree with what he fully convicted himself with. And we start seeing this picture brought up in this text, where she finally sees that kind of devotion. I just have a couple of questions in regard to that. Would you allow the criticisms or the lack of spiritual maturity of your spouse to hold you back from either serve or worship God? That's something I pulled out. What about a church who chides Christ towards his action towards God? How dare you go to the cross for your father? Don't you know I still need you? Don't you know I still need those miracles? Don't you know I need your help? I think sometimes when we start going against what God has commanded and we start looking at Christ and his response, that's when we start seeing things like Peter standing before God or Jesus and saying, "Not so, Lord, you will not go and die." And what was his response? Get behind me, Satan. I think that's one of these cases of a David and Michal type thing. One doesn't understand why they're doing this, but the other one, in full view of God, is seen as being right about the situation. And then two other questions. Doesn't deal with spouse per se, but in regards to David's actions. Was David wrong in his approach, seeming, at least to us, that it might be over the top? Would it even have been wrong for Michal to even ask why he did what he did? In an inquisitive manner, not an accusative manner, but inquiring, why did you do this? I don't think there's anything wrong with asking, but I think the issue came about with her accusation towards David. And then another thing as well, and I know some people do this, should this text be illustrative of the spirit one should have in New Testament worship? I emphasize spirit of worship. David came in with timbrels and music and dancing. That is not authorized under New Testament Christianity. But what about the devotion that David is showing in view of all the people towards God? I love my God. I'm willing to go the extra mile for this. I think that's the attitude he's trying to present. Those are kind of my shotgun points from this. But anybody got any thoughts? David and Michal?
Well, we know that Saul gave it to another man.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know whether she wanted to be that man or not. She might have had some input on, I want to be that man. She may have loved him more than she did David.
That's possible.
We don't know. But, and then when David took her back out of that, from that man, you know, the old story about a scorned woman is very visual. So there's a, you know, because he took her back, it's like maybe she didn't want to be. There's a lot of emotional and things going on here that we don't know all the answers to. And why she was so despised by what they were doing, what caused her.
That's possible.
I mean, I don't know.
I think a text to look into that in regards to her being married to the previous guy. If you look at 2 Samuel 3, verse 15 and 16, after he made the agreement to make peace with Abner, who was of Saul's house, but trying to stop the battles, it would say, Ishbosheth sent and took her, Michal, from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. Then her husband went along with her to Bahiram, weeping behind her. I think he genuinely did care about her, and this killed him. But it doesn't say anything about Michal's response. But I could only see in that time, and I guess it'd be fitting. What am I, some kind of royal propaganda, and I can be tossed to and fro? What about my rights, my wants, things like that? I don't know. Yeah, they didn't have the liberties that they should have had according to the law, but people abused that. Good comment. Any other thoughts? All right, you can go on your way dancing. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Yes.